All right, Standard 13. Standard 13, this is the progressive era standard. This is where we discussed the idea of trying to figure out, okay, what's going well in society, what can we improve on, and the individuals that we focus in on are called muckrakers. So these would be journalists that would view some issue, whatever that may be. We mentioned Upton Sinclair with the issue in the meatpacking industry and just some of the nasty conditions that we read in the excerpt about just rats and the idea of, well, we'll just this might be waste, but we can pour it in to the hopper and just mix it in. People never know. Just the things that we kind of take for granted with some of the legislation that came as a result of the book The Jungle with Upton Sinclair. We also discussed Ida Tarbell's The History of the Standard Oil Company and how she exposed some of the business practices that would be frowned upon in modern day business and economic settings, and how that led to the view of Standard Oil as a monopoly, and people kind of questioning, is a monopoly what's best for the people in the nation. We also touched on Jacob Riis and his view of just some of the situations of poverty and how the nation needed to address that, and focused in on what is called how the other half lives. And so they addressed some of the social problems going on in the late 1800s, early 1900s in the United States. The next portion that we talked about was the roles of women in some of these reform movements of the progressive era. And we focused on Jane Addams and the Hull House. And that was a transition home and a way to provide training, provide a kind of safe environment to learn a trade, learn English, and to be able to kind of transition from coming to the United States as an immigrant from another nation to becoming a productive citizen of the United States. And there was a lot more settlement homes throughout the United States. That's just the one that we focused in on. Then there's another major issue going on. We could tie this, way back to other standards with the Civil War and pre-Civil War, even Reconstruction era. But the implementation of the Jim Crow laws in some of the southern states, and the idea that segregation was okay, that people had that mindset. And so you had a situation in Plessy versus Ferguson where you had Homer Plessy that was trying to show that these laws were ridiculous and should not be supported. And so the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gives constitutional protection of the idea of separate but equal, or these Jim Crow laws. And so it was meant to be that the case would show that these laws should not be in existence, but the case ended up reinforcing segregation really almost till the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So it was a long stretch of time after this. A organization that formed to combat segregation and the unfair practices and inequality was the NAACP, or the National Advancement Association Advancement of Colored People. So this would say, I don't care exactly what the Supreme Court said on this issue, it's wrong. And so we need to address this. We need to show that people of all races can come together, and we need to provide protection in the courts, as well as the ability to provide equality as far as voting rights and suffrage rights, from those Reconstruction amendments, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. So it was to combat some of those issues that were, specifically in the South, but also socially in other states around the United States. Then we finished off with a way to give people more power. So we use the phrase of popular sovereignty, so giving people the power. We had that through different legislations, as far as voter legislations with recalls and referendums, and the idea that people can come up with their own laws, and they need to utilize the structure that's in place, but they can have their voice heard and recall elections. and initiatives, and all of those were things that we discussed, as well as the 17th Amendment, which gives people the uh, right to directly elect senators. Then you have a big issue that has been prevalent for a long stretch of Standard 11, 12, 13, where there was no real rights for the workers. And so there was a push to have labor laws that would protect at minimum the rights of children, but also pushing towards the idea of a minimum wage and the idea of being able to have a sick day period, or depending on the company and how that works. And so just some rights for those workers, the right to unionize if they so choose. All of this would be part of an attempt to improve conditions for workers. Then the conservation movement was kind of spearheaded by Teddy Roosevelt, and this is where we get our first national parks and national monuments, and just the idea that we need to protect what we have, because we're not getting any more of it, and so we got to make sure that we are taking good care of the resources that we have.